You are listening to the One Day at a Time Recovery Podcast. On this podcast, my guests share their stories of alcoholism, addiction, and how they recovered so that you can too. My hope is that you find the inspiration and resources you need to let go of what's holding you back so that you can transform into the person you were always meant to be. Ready? Here we go. Hey friend, welcome to the podcast. You are going to hear from Angela Pugh today, host of the Addiction Unlimited podcast and a woman in long-term sobriety. In fact, she just celebrated 18 years. But before we jump in, I do have a couple of resources for you. For a long time, like almost 8 years, I've only had group support for women. The good news is now there is a new podcast called the Self-Help Junkie Podcast. It's for seekers, dreamers, hustlers, and overachievers who want to get focused and take the actions that will actually help them reach their goals and connect with others just like you. We also have a biweekly meeting that is open to everyone. The format of the podcast is we discuss a self-help topic, we identify 3 action steps, and the following week, we review what went well, what we learned, and if we didn't do the action steps, what got in the way. You can join the meetings to ask questions, share your experiences, and connect with others who love self-help stuff just as much as you do. You can find the podcast on all podcast players, and you can join the meeting by visiting patreon.com/selfhelpjunkie. Today, Angela and I are going to talk about getting back to basics, why she got sober, how she got sober, the evolution of the online sober space, and so much more. If you enjoy this episode, please be sure to share it with a friend and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. I'm really excited to share this conversation with you, so without further delay, please enjoy this episode with Angela. Well, Angela, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Arlena. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. No, it was so funny. I was like, we need to stop talking and hit record because you're saying so many good things. I was like, we need to discuss this. We need to talk about off camera. You were like, I'm simplifying and streamlining. And I was like, we can apply those ideas to business, relationships, but of course, sobriety. We're going to be talking about sobriety. I don't usually do this, but you have such a bio. Give me a quick little bio of who you are and what you've been doing.
Oh, wow. I do a lot.
You do a lot.
I just celebrated 18 years sober, which is probably my most proud achievement in my life. I love being an alcoholic. That doesn't mean that it wasn't difficult and that it wasn't challenging along the way. It certainly was, but it has been the greatest gift of my life for sure. I was a bartender. I bartended all over Hollywood and Beverly Hills and had that life and went to all the parties and did the thing. And it was absolutely phenomenal. And I want to say too, that even through the course of me losing my mind and drinking, I also was really blessed with some very specific opportunities where little seeds were planted in my 20s that really served me well when I had to get sober at 33. So like I always worked with people as a bartender. I always worked next to other bartenders or cocktail servers that were sober. So it didn't seem weird to me to be a sober bartender, right? Now, I didn't know I was going to be a sober bartender, but fast forward many years and that was the case. And it just didn't seem weird to me. I also had people in my life that had been in the program a long time, and that normalized the program and sobriety for me in some ways.
The program
also.
meaning 12 step.
Meaning 12 steps. Yeah. So it was just this really beautiful opportunity to have those seeds planted that were so important. And also looking back, you know, hindsight's always 2020 and you can connect all the dots, and just seeing where the foundation was really being laid for my future and what that was going to look like and what I was going to face. But I knew really early on, like I think I was just telling you this off camera, at 4 months sober, I knew I wanted my entire life to be recovery. I had no idea what that meant or what that was going to look like.
Right.
I just knew that all of my favorite people that I was seeing at meetings every day, like everybody they talked to were other sober people, and all the people they hung out with and went to dinner with and went to movies with and kids events with, it was always with other sober people. And I was like, wow, this is awesome. because
Yeah.
there's that acceptance you get with other sober people, and we
100%.
understand each other and we connect with one another in a way that is just different than how I connect with non-addicted people, you know? So I just
I
knew I
know.
wanted that. I knew I wanted that to be my whole life. And again, I had no idea what that was going to look like. There's nothing I do today that I could foresee then, right? Podcasting
Right.
wasn't even a thing.
I know you've been doing your podcast for, is it 16 years?
No, no. I've been doing my podcast since 2018, I think.
Oh, no, you had to be doing your podcast before me. I just did mine in 2016.
No,
No, 2018?
no. I'm pretty sure it was 18. Yeah. I'm only
Oh, so were
300
you?
episodes in.
Oh, same. Yeah, I was not consistent in the beginning. So I was aware of your work a long time ago. Like I know you've been in the space for 16 years, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think when I was thinking about leaving corporate to do this, I remember coming across your stuff. I thought maybe you had already started your podcast, but maybe not. But I remember seeing like your work and being like, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do. Like I want to
yeah.
ditch the corporate life that had,
Right,
I felt like I was like, God did not put me on this planet to sell security software
right,
to
right.
to the enterprise level. I wanted to do something
Yeah,
that had heart and meaning, and this was my area of expertise. And I remember seeing
yeah.
all your stuff, and I was like, wow, she's showing me that this is possible.
Well, I started my career as an interventionist. So that was the first thing I did. And
Okay.
all of my time and energy and disposable income went into figuring out how to
Building.
become an interventionist, right? And like
Yeah.
what training do I need? What education is it? In intervention, I think even to this day where it is a little easier now, but all of
Mm.
those years ago, that was a really small community and there
Yeah.
definitely weren't a lot of women doing it, you know?
Oh, right.
So I just started figuring all of that out and meeting the right people. And there was one little tiny organization, and I became a part of that and started going to the conferences. And
Mm.
then I just traveled. I mean, forever, I just traveled doing interventions. You know, every week
Wow.
I would fly somewhere, do an intervention, get that person, fly them to treatment somewhere else. And then I would fly home, either Kansas City or Los Angeles. I'd be there for, a handful of days, maybe a week, and then I'd fly out and do it all over again. And
That's
that's what I
wild.
did forever. And that's really what then grew into a coaching practice. I had
Yeah.
already been certified as a life coach. I had already done a lot of education around that because
Yeah.
it helped me be a better interventionist. But
Sure.
then it just naturally kind of morphed into this thing where I would do an intervention with somebody, and then, fast forward 2 months, 3 months, they're coming out of treatment and they would want to continue working with me, or the family would want to continue working with me. So then I started doing, one-on-one sessions
Mm.
and, always virtual or by phone because I was always traveling, so it wasn't and my intervention clients were all over the world, so there was no way I could fly around for sessions.
Right.
But that's really where the coaching piece came in. Was it just was a natural progression off my intervention business.
No, that's amazing. It's really interesting to see how these things evolve, but just this idea of I think there's a lot of people when they first get sober, they're like, "Oh my gosh, everybody needs to know this information," and you want to shout it from the rooftops, right? And so,
For sure.
the whole sober space, especially with social media and Zoom and all that stuff, I think it's totally revolutionized the whole space. We'll have to talk a little bit about sort of the state of the union now. You and I have both been sober a long time and in 12 step, and so we have some strong opinions that may not be what you want to hear. There's what you want to hear and there's what you need to hear. So we're going to talk
Yeah.
about what do you really need to hear. And I was thinking we should kind of go over some of the fundamentals too, right? It's like I'm doing the podcast a long time, almost 8 years, and I'm like, you know what? Maybe I need to do a series about let's just get back to basics and the fundamentals, stuff that I actually use all the time that has helped me stay sober almost 30 years, right? And 20
Yeah.
years, and that's a long time. But let's do something real quick before we go any further. I like to do this little thing called the lightning round, which is slow, but I'm always curious about the books. I'm such a nerd. I'm a self-help junkie. I actually have a whole nother podcast called I Love Books. And so, what books do you love? What books did you really resonate with when you first got sober?
So first sober for me was all self-help stuff, right? There was no such thing as
Yeah,
quit lit. Like
there wasn't, no.
there were a handful of books, but like I could only find them in LA or New York, like,
Oh, wow.
because they had like in LA for sure. And I know New York had a couple of them too, but in LA for sure, like the recovery community is so major, it's so big
Yeah.
and a ton of celebrities obviously, which make it even a little bit bigger, but they had these recovery gift shops where you could go get amazing
Yes.
recovery things, and that was the only place that I could go get like any sort of recovery books, and there weren't that many
It's all
back
you, it's
then.
like what you said. It was all self-help, personal development, psychology
Yeah, right.
books.
So like now when people are getting sober, they flood the podcasts and they get all the quit lit.
Yeah.
When I got sober, you went to the bookstore and you went to the self-help section. Like that's what we
Yes.
did.
I
And
lived in the self-help section.
yes, 100%. So I was really big on Tony Robbins. He was
Oh,
always
me
my
too.
favorite,
So
which of
funny.
course is why I got certified as a life coach too,
Oh,
because I
okay.
just really loved him. I followed him from the time I was a young teenager, so he was always my favorite. I would say another one of my mentors, which is kind of interesting, not necessarily surprising, but because she's not an author or anything, but Oprah. I followed
Oh,
Oprah. I
same.
loved Oprah. I loved who she was as a human being and her character and integrity and her hard work and really being self-made. I have a lot of respect for that.
Oh, yeah.
So she was a person that I always watched and kind of studied. But yeah, I would say
She
those were my two
introduced
big
me,
ones.
sorry to interrupt you, but she really introduced me to some of my favorite all-time Marianne Williamson, Deepak Chopra, Gary
For sure.
Zukov.
Yes. Yes.
Like she introduced me to a bunch of like I'm obsessed with like the self-help stuff and the books, but they're all written by these people that I admired. And I was like, oh my, so I love learning. And she introduced me to so many teachers, which I really love
Yes.
about. She gets a
Same.
bad rap now, but I think if you're really popular, you have a lot of haters.
Oh, yeah, for sure. My sponsor always said, he always said, when you're in the lead, you're also in everyone's line of fire. I was like, oh, nice.
That's good.
Yeah.
Your male sponsor.
I didn't even know Oprah gets a bad rap now. I just love her. I think she's fantastic. But
I know I do too,
exactly
but you
what
and
you
I are
said, like
probably,
just watching her, following her, like her book club, like everything, like she introduced me to all of these incredible thinkers. And ultimately that's always what I was, especially once I wasn't a drunk anymore. I got to really get in touch with who I truly was. And
yeah.
a lot of those were my uncomfortable things that made me drink so much too. So
Yeah.
yeah, but Iyanla Van Zandt was
Oh,
one of my
yeah.
favorites. Even Dr. Phil, when she
Doctor.
made
Yeah.
Dr. Phil back in the beginning, he had some incredible books.
Yeah. Yeah. So many, so many. Dr. Oz, he gets a bad rap now too. You're right. If you're a leader, you're in the line of fire. She
Yeah,
got a lot of, well, maybe we won't talk about why she has a bad rap, but yeah, she did. To me personally, like when I was growing up, like she was the one who started talking about like issues around like being gay, like when nobody was talking about it,
right.
or like sex addiction, or just all kinds of like she like made all this stuff mainstream. And I think a lot of people, especially the young people who are coming up, they weren't there for all that, so they didn't
Yeah.
see the progression and evolution and all the good things that she did for so many people for a generation. I feel like Oprah raised me
Yeah, I agree with that. As a young woman,
as a young
especially.
woman. Yeah.
Yeah.
You and I are probably close in age, but I feel like she raised our generation, and the people coming up didn't see all that. All they
Yeah.
see is where she's at now. And anyway, it's kind of weird. And Tony Robbins was interesting in the sense that so I came across Tony Robbins's stuff before I got sober. So I was probably 22 years old when I came across his stuff. And it was the first time I was introduced to the idea that if you change your mind, you change your life. Like if you rewire your brain or change your thinking, and that you could take control of your life and you could actually reach your goals. And that was super inspiring to me. And that's when I started doing all these workshops where it was like the first thing I was doing in these exercises, it was always stop drinking, stop smoking weed. Those were always in order to reach my goals, I need to get off the couch.
Yeah, right,
Quit
right.
smoking weed all day and get on the couch. Anyway, So, okay, so the Tony Robbins books, Oprah was a good teacher. Were there any other books that really helped you in the beginning? Maybe 12-step literature or something like that?
Yeah, you know what? I really loved Living Sober. That's
Oh,
probably my favorite 12-step book, honestly. I liked the 12
yeah,
and 12 too, 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. I liked
me
that
too.
one too, but Living Sober was really my favorite because it was so practical. You know, it was just a practical guide and it was short and obviously written in much more current terms.
Mm,
I love the AA Big Book.
hmm.
It blows my mind in the fact that it was written in the 1930s and
Yeah,
that it so beautifully articulates an alcoholic just to a T.
yeah.
But it is not the easiest book to read. You know, it really
It's
isn't.
all John Barleycorn and
I know,
all
like
this
it's
weird
hilarious. But
language.
if you can look past all of that, I will tell you one of my favorite things to read on the planet is The Doctor's Opinion in the
Oh,
beginning of
yeah,
the big book. It's one of my favorite things.
yeah.
And just really allows me to continue having a ton of respect for being an alcoholic and what
Hmm.
we're capable of and how strong we are as individuals is just it's such a blessing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to call out. Actually, there's a lot of talk about the powerlessness. There's, a lot of people really rail against that, but it's powerless over alcohol, first of
Hmm.
all. And then it's gaining access to power, and the access to power is actually inside you.
Hmm.
It's like
Yes.
well, where is this higher power
You
you
have
speak
all the
of?
power. You have all the power in this whole situation. Even powerless,
Yeah.
right? I am powerless over alcohol once it's in my body.
Yes,
Prior to that,
everybody is.
yeah, prior to it entering my body, I have a lot of power in my
Right.
choices and what I do, how I conduct myself,
Yeah.
choosing to end up with alcohol in my hand or my mouth. You know, there are a lot of choices that we make. But once alcohol is in my body, it's just like drugs, right? That's why I never did drugs. I tried ecstasy one time and I had this powerlessness experience, and I vowed I would never do drugs again because of it because
Oh,
once it was in my body, I had no control over what was going to happen. I
wow.
had when I was ready to go to bed, the ecstasy was not ready to go to bed. So it, it kept me up and I was really pissed off about it. And but that's the powerlessness, right? It's like
Yeah,
once I start drinking, I don't know how the night's going to turn out. I don't know what my behavior is going to be. I don't know if it's going to be great or if it's going to be atrocious.
it's
I
gonna
don't
be
know
bad.
if I don't know if I'm going to remember what happens or what I do or who I hook up with or if I drive or don't drive. Like that's the powerlessness is that once I start drinking, I don't know any of those things. I don't have any power over those things at that point.
Yeah, and I would argue that that's very well articulated, by the way. Thank you for saying that. And I would argue that the point of a consuming alcohol is that it's a predictable response. It's that like once you consume alcohol, it sets off a chain of chemical reactions that you cannot control. So once you ingest it, you are powerless over, it's not like you can decide to stop it at any point. It's not like you have any control over it once you consume it. So I would argue everybody is powerless over it in the sense that you once the chemical reaction starts, there's no
I think there
stopping it.
can be some varying degrees to that too, because I
Hmm.
definitely had moments of control, right? Like I definitely had times that I would chill out on my drinking, especially if I knew we were going to be drinking a lot more hours, that like I'd stop and get something to eat, drink some water for a little while. Now, listen, I did not exercise that
Yes.
kind of control regularly, but it definitely
It
happened,
happened.
right? But it happened. And I had plenty of times that I went out, drank, even overdrank, that nothing ridiculous happened.
Yeah.
Now, at the end, when I was at a way more advanced stage of alcoholism, those nights were fewer and far between. But you know, it is
Funny how
like
that happens.
right. But I think this is one of the things that people use to divide themselves, right? To separate
Yeah.
themselves. Like, oh, well, they're talking about like they never have control and they're powerless over what's going to happen. And it's always a shit show. And I'm not like that. So I must not be like this. I must not need to quit drinking. I feel like people use these little tidbits to separate themselves from the pack. And so
Yeah.
I always like to point out, like, it's not an absolute for every single person that every single one of us does it exactly the same way.
Right.
I was a hardcore alcoholic and I didn't black out. That wasn't a part of my story. I wasn't throwing up every day of my life. That wasn't a part of my story. I didn't drink alone. That wasn't part of my story. Like there is room for individuality in alcoholism too, and recovery for that matter.
Yeah, I heard a definition for addiction being continuing a behavior that has negative consequences, like in a really
Mm-hmm.
simplistic, I mean, that's like maybe a little bit of an oversimplification, but I was like, yeah, that's something I could relate to.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Cause
think
you'll
any,
keep
yeah.
doing it, even with negative consequences, or even if like your partner says, you've got to stop. Like, this is absurd. Every time we drink, like you're picking fights with me and it gets ugly, or the cops are called, or you're locking me out of the house, or whatever the thing is, right? There's always some drama. If somebody's coming to
Always
you,
drama.
if somebody's coming to you and saying, like, this isn't okay, we've got to figure something out, and you're like, I think I'll keep going. You know?
It really wasn't that minimizing. That's so funny.
Like, yeah, I think I'll keep doing it. Who cares? Oh, I got a DUI. Yeah, that sucks. It's a little embarrassing, but I'll keep drinking. It'll be all
Kind
right.
of
I'll figure it out.
expensive.
I'll figure it
Yeah.
out someday. It'll be fine.
Inconvenient. That's so funny. Yeah, the things that we say to ourselves, the things that we hear other people saying. So let's back up a little bit. I'm always so curious about kind of how we got here. It's you've been sober a really long time. But I'm always curious about family of origin stuff because whatever happens in childhood kind of sets the stage, like it shapes our identity and maybe there's influences. What did you have alcoholism in your family?
So I did have alcoholism in my extended family, not in my home.
Your
But
parents didn't drink?
not my mom didn't, my dad didn't drink, but my dad was drugs. So he was a
Mm.
drug user. Of course, I didn't understand that until I was older, right? Like I knew some of his behaviors were weird. And I love my dad. It took us a long time to have a relationship, but now, I mean, I'm in my 50s, he's in his 70s. Like we have a decent relationship now. Um, but it took a really long time because his choices when I was younger were not
Yeah.
optimal. You know? Little
Funny
did
how
I
that
know.
happens.
Yeah, little did I know I would turn out exactly the same. I just had a different drug of choice, but we were
Yeah.
virtually the same human.
But were
But
you like,
yeah,
I'm never doing drugs because my dad
a
did them and
hundred
I don't want to be
percent.
like, yeah,
100%. I didn't realize that I was exactly the same. I just had a different
right.
drug, right?
Yeah.
It took me a long time to figure that out, but I was forever like, I will never do drugs. I don't want any part of drugs. I don't want to be around drugs because that was his thing, and it
Yeah.
definitely. Listen, he was just wrapped up in his own thing. I was the same way. I just was smart enough to not have kids, right? That's the only difference. We
Oh,
lived the
yeah.
same life. I just didn't have kids. So
Right.
he and my mom had us really, really young, me and my older brother. So he was just wrapped up in his own addiction, right? I don't know if
What
he would
kind of
label it
drugs?
addiction.
I want to know what kind of drugs because it kind of, if they're speed drugs, I envision like one kind of life. If it's like weed or downer drugs, that's like a whole nother experience.
Yeah, I think when I was really young, it was primarily cocaine, I think was his thing.
Okay.
And then I know he ventured into some other stuff when I was a little bit older, but I saw him so infrequently. I don't even,
Mm.
I wouldn't
You
even
didn't
know
grow up
really
with
what he was
him?
doing. No, but I mean, he was around-ish, but no, my mom left him when I was pretty young for obvious
Mm.
reasons,
Yeah. Yeah.
for many reasons.
Ew.
And he just wasn't necessarily a safe person for
Got
us to
it.
be around, right? So like I
Okay.
would see him periodically. I was super tight with my grandmother, his mom. So
Oh,
like I would see him at her house and things like
okay.
that, um but yeah, very little. I mean, like actually spending time with him or being at his house, something like that was very, very little. And
Okay.
I
Yeah.
didn't feel safe either, right? Because he had a party lifestyle and all his partying friends were always around. I was a little tiny little girl. Like I wasn't comfortable. I knew I wasn't safe, right? Like nobody was concerned about my safety in those
Right.
situations. So it's not like I really wanted to be around a lot either.
Yeah, and I feel like I had similar experiences. My parents never drank or did drugs, but I had feelings of being unsafe, right? And I think when you grow up, like the need for safety and security, like lends to things like, I felt like you and I had little similarities the way we run our lives, a little workaholism, maybe a little
Yes, for
doing too
sure.
much,
Yes.
a little, some of that stuff. It's really interesting how a lack of safety in childhood creates sort of like this pretty common experience of, working a lot, performance-based, validation and
And
perfectionism,
fierce
fierce
independence.
and yeah, fierce
Yeah.
independence. Yeah. My goodness. So when did you decide? Did you have like a moment of clarity? Were you just like skipping on rock bottom? Like how did you, as some of us do, I'm raising my hand. How did you decide like I need to get sober? Like how did it happen?
Well, I mean, it definitely wasn't planned. I
Oh.
think, my rock bottom really was a few years in the making. Like my rock bottom, really hardcore, was about 2 years long, honestly. But I had a very clear demise. I moved from Los Angeles. I moved to Kansas City, and my whole family's in Kansas City. And I moved to Kansas City. It was such a culture shock. It was such a different way of living. And certainly from what I was used to. And my whole world, I mean, this happens when you move anyway, when you move across the country or to a different country or something, it is so disruptive in your life. And there's so much emotion behind it, but you really are displaced. And it's very strange. Like you don't have any routines and rituals anymore. Everything is new, everything is different. You don't know your way. I came to a place where, my income literally was cut to 1/5 of what I was used to making.
Yikes.
And because I was a bartender, right? And in LA, I was used to working in high-end upscale lounges, right? And then I came to Kansas City that didn't really even have those places then, It's a lot of
Yeah.
sports bars. It's just a very different atmosphere, and which is very different now from then too. I mean, we're talking 20 years ago. So but anyway, it was a culture shock and I was stressed out and I was lost and I was so uncomfortable. I felt like I didn't fit. Like, what am I even? I don't even have anything to talk about here because I just came from this life that if I even talk about it, people will just think I'm lying. Like I was so out of place. And I was sad and I just drank more, and I was happy to be around my family and, my best girlfriends, but it was sad and it was hard and almost unbearable, honestly. So my drinking just amped up almost immediately. And that was when I was 30. I moved to Kansas City when I was 30. I was sober by 33. And those were my worst years. They were my hardest, most depressed, worst years.
What compelled you to move and leave your fancy LA life behind?
Well, I was really ready to get out of LA. Like I was tired. When you live in a
Yeah.
big city, it's very tiring. You kind of have to be on guard all the time. Like your car's getting broken into, your things are getting stolen. You have to always be looking over your shoulder. Like it's a lot. And even my friends today in LA, they're like, "Why don't you just move back? You're here all the time." I'm like, gosh, you have no idea the simplicity and ease of life here. Like when I want to
Mhm.
go to the store, I just drive to the store and I park in a parking spot and I walk inside. Like I don't have to drive around the building 10 times looking for a spot and like get in a road rage incident over a parking spot or have to have money for the meter or fight a homeless guy for it. Like I just drive to the store and park and go in. You
And you
know,
don't have
I,
to dress up.
Right. Yeah. I never got so much. I mean, I was fancy when I would go out, but I wasn't
Yeah.
like my friends that are like doing a full face of makeup and lashes to go to the grocery store. I was like,
Right. In
fuck
case
that,
you might run
dude.
into somebody.
Because it happens. I mean, I met George from Seinfeld at the grocery store in the freezer aisle.
That's so
So
funny.
that stuff does happen. I get it. But it
Yeah.
just was never my thing. I wasn't in the
Right.
industry that way. So
Yeah, yeah.
anyway, I was ready to get out of LA and I was ready to be somewhere a little more relaxing.
Mm.
And one of my best girlfriends had come out to LA after me. And she had said, she's like, "Well, I think I just want to go back to Kansas City." And I was like, "Oh, really?" I was like, there's a whole country, I wanted to go San Diego or Santa Barbara. Those are kind of my
Ooh,
two. Like Santa Barbara is probably
bougie.
it's my favorite city in this country. Like I love Santa Barbara, but she really wanted to go back and be close to her family. So
Mm,
I really thought it was going to be a pit stop, right? I thought, okay, I'll go back, I'll chill out for a little while, see everybody, say hi, and then I'll go on to wherever my next spot is going to be. But my life started kind of falling apart so quickly. And especially with my income, when all of a sudden your income is cut so drastically, it took away a lot of my freedom too. So it increased my stress and anxiety, and it took away a lot of my choices because then I couldn't necessarily afford to do all the things like I was used to doing, and I couldn't afford to leave. And I was such a mess at that point. Like it was just the perfect vicious cycle.
and the loneliness is like, for an alcoholic, loneliness is like gas on a fire.
Yeah.
It'll burn you up quick.
Yeah.
Loneliness is terrible, terrible.
And
We are
there's
so
so much
ill-equipped.
isolation in, like, I was so emotionally isolated,
Mm,
and I feel like this is something that people don't talk about enough, right? Because I wasn't isolated away from people. I was a good drunk bartender. Like, I was always with people, and on my nights off, we would always go to other bars. Like, I was out doing the things. But
yeah,
emotionally, I was so isolated. Like nobody knew me. Nobody knew how I felt. Nobody knew the concerns I had with my behavior and my drinking and my life. Nobody knew how much I hated myself or how
oh,
disgusted I was with myself and my choices. Like I was just so isolated. I was not connected to anyone, nor did I
right.
really have anybody in my life that cared, which is
That is
very telling
brutal.
too, but that's the truth. It's
Yeah,
not like anybody was really
yeah.
digging. Nobody was calling me like, "Hey, Angela, are you okay?" Like,
We
no,
haven't
it's like,
heard from you. Your
yeah,
behavior
right.
has changed.
It's,
Nobody
hey, where are we
notices.
going tonight? And usually I was paying the bill. That's why everybody called me because I paid for everything.
Oh, that sucks. Yeah, it sucks when like nobody notices that you're dying on the inside.
Yeah. But they couldn't. It's not like I could be mad at anybody else for it because I
Right.
intentionally painted that picture, right? I
Yeah,
made
we do it to
sure.
ourselves.
Yeah, I made sure I put a lot of energy into making sure it looked like I was doing
Yes.
great, right? That's my
Yes.
fault. Those were my choices. That's not on
Yeah.
anybody else.
No,
But
no.
ultimately, I had these few years that were really hard. I got in
Okay.
one of the worst relationships of my life, right? Emotionally abusive. And he was just a really bad human and bad boyfriend. And that just continued to break me down even worse. My drinking continued to escalate from there. And finally, I mean, I knew the last couple of years that I was going to have to do something sometime, but I also always thought I was going to die. I didn't think that I was going to live. Like, I just thought one night I would go to sleep and I would never wake up. So
Oh,
I didn't have future plans, right? And that it was true for sobriety too. Like, I
that's
never
sad.
planned on getting sober because I didn't think I would be alive.
That's
But
so
I
sad.
knew it's so sad. But I knew that my drinking was out of control and I knew that it wasn't sustainable. But I took a couple of breaks. Like I quit once for 30 days, like everybody does. I quit once we just didn't have cute names back then, dry January. We didn't have all that.
Sober
But
October.
yeah. So I
No
quit
booze
for 30
November.
days once, and then I quit for 60 days once. And when I took that break for 60 days, I really knew then that time, I really knew it needed to be forever. I just wasn't in a space to make that commitment, like, but I knew at that point that I was going to have to stop forever if I
Hmm.
continued to be alive, and I knew I
Yeah,
would
if you
have to
wanted to
get
live.
sober. So ultimately, one night I'm out with my friends. I leave the bar to drive home and I crash my car on the freeway at 70 miles an hour and I hit another car.
Ooh.
Yeah. And I thought I killed the guy that I hit. And that was really my moment, right? Where I understood that drinking was absolutely no longer an option because I
Mhm.
didn't care if I hurt myself, right? Like if I would have been hurt and didn't hit anybody else, if I would have died, like I didn't care. I would have been happy to die. I wanted to die every day just to make the pain end, you know?
Right.
But it never dawned on me that I could hurt somebody else. And in that moment, I was like, whoa, this is not okay. Like, this is not my future. And I don't remember a ton of things, but the one thing that I was kind of obsessing about is like standing on the side of the freeway and thinking like, I have to call my mom right now and tell her I just murdered somebody.
Oh my
That's
God.
how I felt, right? Like I just murdered somebody. And it was so crazy just thinking like, I am literally going to ruin her entire life in one sentence. And I have like one of the best moms in the world. You know, she's one
Mm.
of those moms that
Yeah.
everybody would die to have.
Yeah.
And those were my big things. You know, the other thing I thought too was I thought there has to be something else I'm meant to do because that also wasn't the first time that I was in a situation that I probably shouldn't have walked away from. And I
Mm.
couldn't figure out how I kept getting out of these close calls, you know, and the guy that I hit was fine, by the way. I have to say that too. He was fine. I was the only one injured. Which is its own crazy dramatic piece of the story, but it was I just remember thinking like there must be something else that I'm supposed to do because the universe keeps protecting me.
Yeah.
And I'm trying my hardest to die every
Mm.
freaking day. And I keep not dying. You know, I'm like, what is this about? But those were really the biggest pieces of the puzzle for me. And I knew I had to change my life then.
So how did you end up in 12 step?
So I laid around and went through withdrawal with my Rottweiler. I had him then. And he was very patient and understanding with me. I did that for about I think it was 7, 8 days, maybe. And then I went to my first meeting. Obviously, I knew I was going to go to AA because if you want to be a person that doesn't drink, then that's where you go. Especially back then, there weren't
There's
options.
nothing else.
There
Yeah.
was nothing else. I knew, and this is how denial did not play a role in my story, right? I had zero denial. I was not fighting this thing. I was not worried about seeing people I knew at meetings, right? You hear people all the time like, oh, well, I went to a meeting across town because I didn't want to know anybody. And it's like, well, that's a great way to not fit in too. Like, go to a meeting in your
I did
freaking
that.
neighborhood because, yeah, everybody does. Like, go to a meeting in your freaking neighborhood. That's where you fit, right? So I knew for me, I'm so lazy I knew it had to be close to my house. Like there was no driving across town, you
It's
know.
so funny.
If I would have driven across town, I would have only gone one time. So I
Right.
had to find meetings that were within a
Okay.
few minutes because otherwise I knew I wouldn't go because I was lazy. I am lazy. Intrinsically, laziness is one of my biggest issues.
I don't
So
believe, listen, I don't believe that for a second.
I've come a long way.
Yeah, now we've been talking about workaholism.
Yeah, yeah. I've come a long way, but I mean, I fight it. Like, listen, I promise you, I would much rather lay on the couch and watch television than do anything else.
I've
Or
often
maybe
said
play my
that.
little game on my iPad. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I am lazy. I have to always be aware of that.
I've often said the only thing I do in moderation is recovery.
Right.
My
The
recovery
only
work.
the only thing I do in moderation is vegetables, unfortunately.
Things that are good for us. Like,
Yeah.
calm down. All
So
right.
I
So did you
went
do the whole like 90 and 90 and you got
I
a
did.
sponsor?
I didn't miss a meeting for 5 years. Yeah,
Wow.
I think I was a solid
Like
five
every
years
day
every day,
for
always.
five
Yes.
years. And you
Yes.
got a dude sponsor, which is
I
not
was
recommended.
not fucking around. I knew like they said come every day and I said great, see you tomorrow. But I had a blast, right? Again,
Yeah.
I had zero hangups. Like I walked in the door, all I wanted to do was not drink, and I knew that's where people went when they didn't want to drink anymore. I did not care about the steps. I didn't care about the people. I didn't care if people
Mm,
were religious. I didn't care about anything. All I cared about was me not drinking.
right.
And I got there, and these people were freaking hilarious and they were really
So funny.
fun and they were incredible. And I was like, oh, hell yes, I'll come back tomorrow. I'd love to, you know? And I just loved it. I just loved it because I didn't have any hangups. I wasn't,
Yeah.
you know, there's a piece in the book, in the AA book that says, you cease fighting anyone and anything or
Right.
everyone and everything, however they
Yeah.
say it.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. Like, that's when you really know you're ready to get sober. You don't have any fight left.
You surrender,
You surrender, right? It's like, whatever, dude, I'll
acceptance.
do whatever you want. I don't give a shit if you believe in God and I don't. Who cares? Like, that's the dumbest thing to be worried about, you know?
Do
Like,
you know
you
how
just,
much that keeps people out of
I
12-step
know.
rooms?
I know because I had the same thought. I was like,
Yeah.
gosh, I'm not really down with the God thing. And then my next thought was, well, Angela, good news. You're 30 fucking 3 and nobody can force you to believe in God. Like,
There you
you're
go.
fine. You know what I
It
mean? Like,
doesn't
get over
matter.
yourself.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't
And don't
matter.
worry about what other people are doing, right?
Yeah.
Other people are allowed to believe in God if they want to. Like, mind
Yeah.
your own business. Like, all I cared about was not drinking. So I just was
Yeah.
really blessed. I just didn't have any hangups. But that is, I mean, that's how
You're
you
really
know.
ready.
Yeah, that's how you know when you're really ready is you don't have any desire to fight anything. It's like, yeah, cool, I'll try whatever because it's really important to me.
Yeah. It's interesting. I want to be sure. I know we have probably about 15 minutes left, and I want to talk about the state of the union as it is with the sober space, because you and I came up at, in the same framework. I came in much like you, like I don't care. Just tell me what I need to do so that I
Right.
don't ever drink again. Like, I was desperate not to drink again. So I was like, I don't care. I'll do whatever you want. Like,
Yeah.
and there was no quit lit. There were no podcasting wasn't a thing. I and I was like, I'll just do whatever you tell me to do.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that I didn't have a lot of options. But I had some religious trauma. So when they were started talking about God and blah, blah, blah. Thank God nobody ever said anything about Jesus or the Bible or anything like that. Cause I would have been all like that would I would have put screeching the brakes on. That's what that noise was. Like, full stop. I don't know if I could have done it, but I got over it really quick after. And that's it's so funny because a lot of people are like, I don't get the vitriol towards AA because, like, if you don't like that, then don't do that.
Right.
Like,
Right.
take what you like and leave the
Yeah.
rest. There is some
Yeah.
structure around it, which I found super helpful, like abstinence and doing steps in order, like getting a sponsor, doing them in order, those kinds of things, and taking suggestions from my sponsor. But I was really lucky. I had sponsors that were like, well, I don't know what you should do, but this is what I did. Like, they were very
Right.
clear. Like, where I came up, they were very clear. This isn't about giving advice. Like, they're not therapists. This is a peer support program.
Right.
The directives are clear. You just share your experience. You don't give advice. And so, well, did you have something similar to that? A sponsor, like sponsorship in that way? Like, you had a dude, which is very rebellious, by the way.
I did. But listen, I've always been rebellious, right? Like, I am feral. So that helped me a lot too going into those rooms because I like, listen, you're
They're
not
all
going to,
feral.
yeah, but like, you're not going to make me do anything I don't want to do in any
Yeah.
room, you know? So I
Yeah.
think I was just probably a little more comfortable doing my own thing. And I don't
Yeah.
mind going against the grain. Like, a lot of
Same.
people struggle with codependence and people pleasing, and they get very uncomfortable not following the herd. And I just was never that person. And I do consider that a
I love that
blessing.
about you, by the way.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Because that would have kept me out, right? If
Yeah.
I was really fearful of all of those things, that would have kept me out too. And I probably would have died. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I just am very comfortable doing my own thing. And I'm very comfortable saying to people, I didn't get a sponsor for a long time. It was 10 months before I got a sponsor because it was a guy. I knew very quickly who I wanted to be my sponsor. And then I started hearing the rumblings, women work with women and men work with men. And I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, well, let me just hang back and keep showing up every day and keep not drinking. And I'll just figure it out as I go. Like, maybe I'll meet somebody else that I like as much as him. Maybe I won't. I mean, I don't know. I just wasn't going to worry about it. Like, I was fine. I was staying sober. I was loving it. So I didn't really care. But when people would say to me, like, hey, Angela, are you going to get a sponsor? I was really comfortable going, oh my gosh, yes, thank you so much for bringing that up. I will absolutely get a sponsor as soon as it feels right for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. I'm in agreement with you. I can't wait till that day comes. Like, I didn't take it as they're trying to control me or tell me what to do. I was just like, hell yes, I would love to have a sponsor.
That is so funny. That's
Like,
such a great
unfortunately,
attitude.
Like, unfortunately, you're just going to be pissed when you find out who I want it to be. You know?
Well, for those that are listening, like I know women who have had male sponsors, and I actually interviewed a guy recently who had a woman sponsor. She was like a mother figure to him, and that's who he felt safe with, was this woman that was like a mother figure. But the reason I believe that it's typically women with women, because like from my experience, I was terrified of women. I did not have great relationships with women. And I was terrified, but I was so desperate to be sober. I was like, okay, I'll find a woman. It didn't occur to me that I could rebel. Damn it. But probably for me, it was a good thing because at 25, I had never had a real and safe and intimate relationship with another human being. And if that had happened with a man, I probably would have fucked him.
Yeah,
Just,
there's no
that's
question.
just how I
Listen,
probably would have fallen in what I thought was love.
right. And there's no doubt, I say this all the time, like knowing what I know today, I would never recommend that path to another person. I just knew I was okay in that because I do not struggle with boundaries. So I knew that,
Ah,
and
yeah, it doesn't sound like it.
I didn't know that that was the issue in the beginning. Like I didn't
Ah,
understand why they said men with men, women work with women, men work with men. I didn't even
yeah.
know that that was the issue. Now, 200 years later, right? I get that you're talking
200.
about a group of people who have boundary issues and have relationship issues for sure, and
Sex addiction.
love sex addiction and love to overstep boundaries, right? Now I get it.
Yeah.
I just knew for me, I grew up in a very male dominant family, full
Mm.
just narcissism, misogyny. Like that was the environment that I was raised in. So for me to try to work with a female would have never worked because my brainwashing back then was men are the leaders.
Oh,
Men
interesting.
lead, women follow. So I also couldn't have somebody too nice, right? Like I had to have somebody, as you hear me and how I talk to myself, right? I'm in your face. And I needed somebody that was going to really be able to stand up to me, challenge me, and tell me what to do in a package that I would listen. And
Got
and
it.
that's what my sponsor was. I had a lot of respect for him from day one. He was hilarious. He was super smart. He was smart in recovery. And he had been sober almost 20 years when I got sober, and he was there every single day. And that was a mental note for me. I'm like, damn, look at these people here, sober decades, and they're still showing up every single day. Like
Yeah.
he set an example that I wanted to follow.
Okay. And you
And that's
felt
where he was
safe, like he
important.
was never inappropriate and you felt
No,
safe and
no. And he was hard on me. He was not easy on me at all. He was hard on me. He's such a softie now. We were laughing about this a couple of weeks ago. Like he's such a pushover now. But when I was new, I mean, he was hard on me. Like he made me go in and apologize to my whole group one time for being selfish. For
wow.
doing something they didn't even know I did. And then he drove up to the meeting to make sure I did it. Like he came up there to make sure that I did it. But
Holding you
that's
accountable. That's
right.
awesome.
But that's what I needed. And I loved that about him. I loved his
Oh,
commitment to it. I loved
yeah.
watching how he lived his life. I loved every time his phone rang, it was another sober person. Like
Yeah.
he really was. When we say you pick somebody who has what you want, we mean in all areas of life, not just in
Yeah.
sobriety, but it was important to me that somebody was practicing the principles in their regular life too, and showing up with honesty and
Yeah.
integrity and enjoying themselves and
There you
being
go.
of service, right? Those were the things. And that's how he raised me, and he was
Yeah.
perfect. He was absolutely perfect for me.
That's beautiful. And I love that. And it sounds like, I used to hear things like there's a wrench for every nut in those rooms. Like
Yeah.
and if you don't think that you have the best sponsor ever, then find a new one. And I was always lucky I had really good sponsors. Now, if we transition a little bit to think about, you and I, that's how you and I were raised, right? And that's how we got sober, and we've been sober for decades now, both of us. How do you feel about, like, I know there's some pros and cons to sort of like this new wave of sobriety. There's people with like 2 years sober, claiming to be sober sponsors. And listen, this is going to sound super condescending. I'm sorry. I have a feeling I'm having a feeling. I have some concerns. I have some concerns about people who lack experience and don't have any background in psychology or therapy. Or, do you know what I'm saying? I feel like people need to be very careful about who they look to for mentorship.
Yeah, I think as individuals, we have to be very clear on what we're looking for, right? Not just who, but you need to be real clear that you're not finding somebody on Instagram with a podcast and going to them to work through your trauma, right? Unless they are a professional in trauma. So you have to be really clear on what you're seeking. You can't expect a person, in their first 5 years of sobriety themselves to come in, to swoop in and be your knight in shining armor and solve all your problems. That's not fair. So I think and of course, my premise for everything is personal responsibility, right? So you've got to be
For sure.
clear that you are reaching out to certain people for sobriety guidance. You're reaching out to people for how to not drink on a daily basis. And you only need to be sober a minute longer than somebody else to be able to help with that, right? So I'm okay with some pieces of that, but I think the people seeking help are blurring those lines more than the people offering help. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I do see that there are people who don't have certifications or any training. I do like, this is where I'm conflicted. It's like I do see the benefit of peer
Yeah,
support,
for sure.
but
Yes.
then you involve money, and for paid support, it should be with somebody who is a professional and who has experience.
Yeah, I do
Somebody who
get
has
that. I see
seen a
what
lot
you're
of
saying.
things,
Yeah,
because
I see what you're
everybody's
saying.
situation is so different. People are
Yeah.
presenting, it could be like people could have trauma, family history, they could be chemically or physically addicted, and maybe process addicted, which is different than chemical addiction. I mean, and
Yeah.
so if people are, being like, well, this is what I did, that's one thing, but it's another thing to say, this is what you should do.
Right. No, I see what you're saying. And
Yeah.
I agree with that. It is, listen, the problem too, though, is, like I went and did all the college stuff and addiction counseling, and I went to social work school, and I don't even know how many life coach certifications I've done and recovery coach certifications just because I want to know everything.
Yeah,
But I have to be honest, a lot of those things, including college, didn't teach me much.
I
So
know.
I feel like you can still jump through those hoops and still not be a really solid professional helping person.
Which is why
You know,
experience matters.
right, which is where experience really matters for sure. And also being able to set your own boundaries, right? Like I have to know what my scope of practice is too. And I have to be able
Yeah,
to say to people, like, no, I don't deal with gambling addiction. No, I don't do eating disorders because that's not where my training and education is. Do I understand those things to a certain degree? Of course, but I also haven't lived them. And
right.
I am a person that likes to teach from experience, but I also like
Mhm.
to learn from someone else's experience.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I think it can be really tough, but I think that we as consumers really shoulder more of the responsibility to do our due diligence and know what people are capable of and what their education is or isn't, and to be clear on what we're seeking them out for. I have a coach for everything. I don't expect to have one coach that can do all the things, right? Like those are all
yeah.
different people. Like my little brain, it needs washed, like this thing is scrambled. So we got a lot of work to do.
I
But
remember some guy was like, "Oh, I think those AA people are washing your brain," and I was like, "Good," because
yeah, it needs it
yeah,
desperately. Yeah.
I started a membership site a while ago called the Brainwashers Club. I thought that was a cute name.
Yeah.
We
It's
need
so
some
true.
brainwashing. Yeah, that's so.
You never did your lightning round, by the way.
Well, we kind of did a couple questions, and I got distracted, which is typical of me.
All right. I just wanted to remind you in case.
Thank you. Yeah, it was just like, well, I'll just ask you now, do you have a mantra or a quote that you live by? Mine's obviously like one day at a time, but is there an idea that is kind of working on you right now?
I live for mantras. Probably my most favorite is you only get in life what you have the courage to ask for.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah. And
Makes
that's
me wonder.
Oprah. That was Oprah. And that's one of
Oh,
my favorite. You know, another one I love is it only takes 20 seconds of insane courage. You know, because I have so much anxiety and just like 20 seconds feels easy. And I just have to say that over and over to myself. Like if there's a phone call I have to make that I just don't want to, right? Or I'm stressed out, or
yeah.
going to a meeting your first time. It's like, dude,
Mm,
you just need 20 seconds of courage. Just walk in the door and sit down. That's all you need is 20 seconds. You know,
yeah.
you can do 20 seconds. So
I
yeah,
love that.
I love mantra. And then never miss a good opportunity to just be quiet.
Ooh, that's powerful. I like the 20 seconds one. That'll
Yeah.
get me to take some actions.
You know where I got that from too was that Matt Damon movie, We Bought a Zoo. That's what that was in. And the
Oh,
second he said it in the movie, I was like, oh my God, that's life changing.
isn't that funny how TV shows or movies can just hit you? There was one, we were just watching Grey's Anatomy last night. I haven't watched it in a long time, but my favorite line in that, Preston Burke, this neurosurgeon, was like, I was never the smartest or most talented or gifted. He goes, but I worked the hardest.
Artist, yes,
Yeah, I was like, okay, I'm not the smartest. I'm not the most gifted or talented, but I can I'll work my tail.
yeah,
I'll outwork somebody, no problem.
for sure.
Yeah, I love that. What is one thing you wish you knew when you first got sober?
Oh, what a great question.
I'll let you
I
think.
Well,
But
I
my,
wish
oh,
I
do you have one?
knew. Yeah, I wish I knew that life isn't supposed to be perfect all the time. You know, I feel like I took it so, and I see this in my clients all the time too. Like we take it so deeply personally when we have something negative happen, you
Make
know,
a
like
mistake
we make a
or
mistake or something just doesn't go the way you want it to, or you don't get the job or you get broken up with, like whatever the thing is, we tend to think like this is awful and it only happens to us. Like we personalize it. And it's so absurd. Like it's just the nature of life. You know, I remember my
yeah,
sponsor saying to me once, he's like, Angela, your bad mood will pass. Like you don't get in a good mood and stay that way forever. You're not going to get in a bad mood and stay that way forever. You know, but we don't. And I wish I would have just understood that. Like it's not supposed to be easy. It's not
yeah.
supposed to feel good all the time.
Mm-mm.
What makes you strong is that you continue to show up and you don't give up.
Yeah. Persistence, man. That's my superpower.
Yeah.
I love that. I know we got to wrap up, but I want to make sure that people know how to get a hold of you. You have a podcast too. I'm going to be on your podcast too. I'm super excited
Yeah.
about it. And how long have you been doing your podcast?
Since 2018.
Oh, I asked you that. Okay, 2018. And what's the name? So everybody knows.
Addiction Unlimited.
Man, I have unlimited addictions. That's so fun. Addictions. Okay, so I'll leave a link to that. And do you have a website? Are you still doing coaching?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the best way to find me really is the podcast, addictionunlimited.com. And I have a Facebook group that is same name, Addiction Unlimited. That's probably the
Okay.
best way to kind of start getting in my sphere
Mhm.
and getting used to how we do things. But we have such a phenomenal supportive community that I'm just so proud of every day. Like,
Nice.
you know how it is. Like you spend so much time with people that are your clients and you build these incredible
Yeah.
relationships. And then last year I started doing sober travel, right? So I'm hosting sober trips and we went to Costa Rica and this year we're going to Italy. And this group of people now that I've been building over these last several years have just become a second family. And
Yeah.
it's just phenomenal. Such an incredible group we've got.
I really love that. Italy should be fun. Where are you going in Italy?
We are going to Rome and Florence.
Oh,
And then
I gotta go back to Rome.
I'm going to stay extra days because of course I have to go shopping in Milan.
Yeah, we didn't get to Milan. We flew into Rome, went to Florence, and then we went to where's the water? Venice.
Venice.
Yeah, that was cool. But
Yeah, I'm
that'll
excited.
be super. How many people do you think will go on this trip?
What do we have? We have 8 already, and I think there are 8 spots left. So we
Oh,
had
that's a good
16.
size.
Yeah, we had 16 in Costa Rica. It was amazing. One of the best weeks of my
Yeah.
life by far. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds amazing. We'll have to keep tabs on where you go and maybe I'll surprise
Yeah.
show
Oh,
up
yeah.
to
You
one of
should
your.
come. Oh, it's so fun. So,
Yeah,
so fun.
we went to Italy a couple years ago and we're dying to go back. But amazing. Well, listen, thank you so much for all the work that you do. You're doing, listen, I know what it's like to produce a podcast. It's a lot of work. So thank you for all of the lives that you touch with that. You're doing amazing work. And we'll leave all the links to everything in the show notes. And I'll look so forward to being on your podcast pretty soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much. What a pleasure to get to know you better.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much. One last thing before you go, if you enjoyed the podcast today, please don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and leave a review. And if you'd like to make a donation to the podcast and help me keep the lights on, you can do so by visiting odatchat.com. There's a donation button or membership button on the right-hand side. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us.